that going. Okay, so now we are now recording, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Basu, and he will tell us about readiness for online education in Bangladesh. Take it away.
Thank you, Shalana. Good morning from Dhaka. I believe it's afternoon in Japan. So good afternoon. Welcome to my presentation on readiness for online education in Bangladesh. So in my talk, I'll give you a background to the study and then talk about the research questions that myself and my colleagues had when we started the research on the feasibility of online education in Bangladesh. I think I have to go back to the previous slide. It was actually, this talk will be based on the findings of a collaborative research project that was led by Professor Rubina Khan, who's my teacher at the University of Dhaka and now a colleague, and two other colleagues, Ahmed Bashir and Ilyasuddin. This project was not funded by any organization, but we felt that it was a research that we had to conduct because there was a lot of debate in electronic and print media and in different forums about the feasibility of online education when the pandemic broke out. Classes were cancelled, students were sitting idle at home, and we were pondering whether we should go ahead with online education. But you might be aware that like in many developing countries, as in many developing countries, online education was not common practice in Dhaka or in the rest of the country. We had just started using Zoom and some other platforms for occasional informal conversation and meetings, but it was not a common practice. So there was a concern that if we start something like that in this country here at the school level or college level or at the university level, teachers may not be able to teach online and students might not be ready, they may not have the devices, they may not have strong internet connectivity. So there were debates and we thought we should approach it empirically, collect data from a large number of institutions and then see if the popular perception matches our findings. So I'm going to share the findings, a few quantitative findings. So I'll be selective because it was a large scale study and we had a lot of data. So it's not possible to cover all of that here in a short presentation. And then I will move on to some of the suggestions we would like to offer. We offered after the study was completed. And then I'll talk about the impact our study has had and some of the limitations that our study had. My initial plan was that I will finish my presentation in 20 minutes and there will be 10 minutes of Q&A, but I feel that we could have it now during the presentation. So if you have any question, any query, any comment, please feel free to stop me. We could do it in a more dialogic way.
I have a question. You mentioned reaching out to institutions. Was this focused just on university, or were you looking at high schools and their ability to teach online?
No, we are only looking at the situation in the public universities in Bangladesh. And here we have around, well, a little over 50 public universities and around 100 non-government universities. So this study was focused on the public universities.
Great, thank you.
Yes. So the pandemic broke out in around the world, and we were waiting when it would come to Bangladesh. So we found out. I mean, there was this report of uh, detection of coronavirus in March. Initially, it was about 2 or 3 cases, and then the next day another 3 cases. But then the government and university administration realized that it was risky to continue with classes. So education institutions were shut down for obvious reasons. So students went back to their hometown or to the villages where they come from. In April, some of the private universities started online classes. They started it, and the public universities were closed, but the private universities, they had taken the initiative. But what happened is the University Grants Commission and the Ministry of Education intervened, and they actually asked the universities to stop the online classes. Now, it might come as a surprise, but when it happened in April, people are not really sure that it would be possible for students to attend classes. So there was this concern that some of the students would be left out. So it would be unfair to go ahead without proper preparation or without some research evidence or discussion. So so that happened, and negotiation started between the universities and the authorities, and the universities also arranged different meetings, discussions to actually find out what to do about it. Now, on 7th of May, UGC officially permitted the private universities to start to resume online classes. So there was no bar anymore to start those classes. The public universities still remained mostly shut down. Now, on 25th of June 2020, the public universities took a decision that they would start online classes, and there was no objection from the University Grants Commission or the Ministry of Education. So it was during that period that we conducted, myself and my colleagues, designed this study. We wanted to collect data from as many places as possible. So our objective was to find out about teachers and students' readiness for online instruction with regard to access, appropriate instructional practices, and testing and assessment. Now, another objective was, of course, we wanted to share our findings with the University Grants Commission and the authorities of the universities that were involved in our study. We wanted to email a summary of our findings to those universities, and we did that. The research questions we had initially were, how do Bangladeshi public university teachers and students in the Department of English gauge their readiness for online teaching? What were these teachers and students' perceptions of online pedagogy, and what was their perception of online assessment? Now, it's a mixed methods design, and we had 158 teachers and 1468 students. So it was a large scale study. 17 public universities were involved. We would love to include more universities, but we thought the universities that we had selected were from different parts of the country, and they would kind of represent the research universe, as we call it. So 52 public universities, and we collected data from 17, so that would suffice. It was mostly about convenience when it came to whom we would involve in the study. There were, and if we look at the teachers and the students composition, we tried to have equal participation of male and female teachers and students. We had questionnaires. We developed a questionnaire, and there were like a type, questions, and also yes/no questions. And we conducted focus group discussions, multiple focus group discussions with groups of teachers and groups of students. And we collected the survey data through Google Forms, and we found it quite convenient to collect data that way. But we had to pursue the participant. We had to call them to remind them that we sent an email, and if they have seen the email, and if they would love to participate in the study. But in the end, we actually we thought that we had got good responses from the participants. Here are some of the findings. Students reported that 25% of them had laptops, but if you look at the percentage of students having smartphone, over 90%, nearly 95% of the students had smartphones. So that was our finding. Now, it might look like a very encouraging sign, but we were still concerned about the 5% who didn't have smartphones, and also about the students who didn't have laptops or desktop computers, because if we assign our students with any homework, any writing assignment, would they be able to complete those assignments in their smartphone? So that was a concern. But more than that, even though 95%, nearly 95% of the students had smartphones, internet access was a concern. So 92% said that they had access to mobile internet or Wi-Fi, where they were at that time. But then again, there was this concern that even though they had internet connectivity, it would probably not be strong enough to attend online classes. So if we look at the pie chart for question 10, most of them said that their internet connection was average. Many of them said that 22% said their connection was very poor. 14% very poor. So a large percentage of the students had unsatisfactory internet connection. Now, about the teachers, many of them said that they were familiar with Zoom and Google Classroom and different platforms. So that was an encouraging sign, but we are still concerned about the teachers who had no experience of using those platforms. Now, I would like to share some qualitative data with you. Now, what were the challenges that we found that the teachers and students had? The first one relates to lack of resources and affordability. One teacher said, some students do not have necessary electronic devices like laptops or desktop computers. Many of them, though most of them have smartphones, many curriculum activities like writing term papers and making presentations can be challenging with smartphones. So that was a concern from a teacher. Now, a student said, I don't have anything except for a smartphone to attend online classes. Now, to do all the assignments using a phone is tough. Now, there was this issue of inequity, and that was a major issue. We were really nervous about online classes because we knew that a segment of the student population would have no access to devices or internet. So there was something that had to be done before we could actually confidently start online classes. So this is what a teacher said: the exclusion of a sizable number of students who cannot access the facilities needed for online teaching will further aggravate digital inequity. And it was a concern that was shared by many of the participants. Lack of technological competence. So many teachers and students pointed out that there were students and there were teachers who were not very comfortable teaching online, and a lot of them were not very confident about using online platforms. So there was something that had to be done to address that. Now, barriers to pedagogy and materials. Now, many teachers, many participants pointed out that it was difficult to teach online because they couldn't see the students, and it would be difficult to interact with the students. If we look at what Teacher 20 said here, any student can switch off the camera willingly and can complain that it is not working. They can also leave the class on the pretext that they got disconnected. And later on, after the research, since we started online classes, we have had this experience of students getting connected and disconnected, and then being there and not responding. So some of these concerns actually came true when we started online classes later on. A student said, "I don't have hard copies of necessary books here, and reading PDF is so annoying and my eyes ache sometimes." This is what a student said. So moving on to barriers to assessment. Now, assessment was an area that many teachers were unsure about. Now, unfair means in the exams, cheating, these were the main concerns. Now, if we look at some of the comments here, Teacher 13 said, assessment of learning outcomes will be difficult. Designing online tests without technical support, testing software, web security will really be challenging. Another teacher said, I cannot ensure test reliability. I've just conducted a simple MCQ test online and 9 out of 10 students scored 10 out of 10. I had to reject the scores because those very students did not even get 50% of the marks. So students were also not very confident about fairness in online assessment. You can hardly have a fair assessment online. No teacher can ensure that students will be honest. Everyone wants a high CGPA. So it's very competitive in Bangladeshi educational culture. Students want to do well, and job opportunities depend to a large extent on students' academic results. So if we conduct online tests, there might be this possibility of cheating and unfair means. And there are also psychological barriers. One teacher said, it's creating mental pressure since it has come all on a sudden. I was initially scared as I had no idea about online classes. I can imagine the faces of my students as they're also not mentally, culturally, technologically, they are 100%. So teachers and students were not really focused on the classes because there were things to do at home. They were doing household chores that they were not used to doing, because in Bangladesh, it is a common practice to have some support staff to help with cooking and cleaning. And there was no support available at the time. And then there were ailments in the family. Many of them had to run to hospitals for the treatment of a relative. And then there were news coming in that the situation was getting worse. So students and teachers were not fully focused on online classes when we were conducting the study. Now, this point was made by a student. During the lockdown, without the help of the maids, we are doing all the household chores ourselves with our parents. We can't get away from anxieties and stresses arising from the deaths and ailments. this pandemic has affected the family income of many of us. It's hard to concentrate on studies. So many lost their jobs, many had reduced income. So a lot of people were struggling. So parents of the students were struggling with the expenditure. So affordability of internet and uh, other related costs was actually a major concern. So some suggestions for overcoming the challenges. We asked our participants to give suggestions for the challenges that they mentioned. And the suggestions were grouped into 7 categories. There were suggestions regarding how to ensure access to resources and how to ensure affordability. So there was this belief that the universities, the institutions had to support the students, mainly the students, but some teachers also needed help in terms of training. Um, but the students had to be provided with the devices. And when we shared our findings with university administration and the University Grants Commission, we actually got good response from them. And we came to know that the administration was going to offer financial help to students to help them purchase the devices and to bear the expenses of internet and data packages. So there were suggestions about ensuring equity, and that's related to the first point here. And then there was this suggestion that students and teachers had to be trained, and some training programs were arranged, even though in a follow-up study, we found out that the training programs were not adequate, but there was a beginning. It was a good beginning. At least teachers got some training before starting online classes. But then there were other participants who had already had this experience of using platforms and devices. So they said that they needed advanced training, and the training that they were receiving was not really very useful. So there were mixed responses from the participants. Developing the infrastructure, the participants pointed out that we would have to develop our infrastructure for online teaching, not only for the emergency situation, not only for emergency remote teaching, but also for later when we would go back to online, the face-to-face classes. We would still continue with some of the activities, student consultation meetings, and one-to-one consultation sessions. So some of the things we were doing at that point in time could be continued later on, and we would need a proper infrastructure for that. And we'd also have to find out about appropriate teaching strategies, how to involve the students in online classes, how to provide materials, and because there was a realization that face-to-face classes and online classes were different, and for online classes, teaching strategies had to be different, had to be adapted. Then there was this suggestion from the participants that we would need some guidelines and maybe a policy as well for online assessment, because it was an area that many teachers and students were unsure about. And then, of course, we had to address psychological issues as well, because teachers and students were suffering in many ways. So in conclusion, I think I should say a few words about the impact of the study. Like I said before, we shared our findings in the form of a brief report with the University Grants Commission and a few universities. We emailed them our findings and the recommendations, and we were happy to see that many universities appreciated and actually took some measures along lines we recommended. Um, there were measures to conduct training, and then there were measures to help the teachers and the students. So we thought that the universities were moving in the right direction. To talk about the limitations of the findings that I've shared with you, this study was conducted when online classes had just started. Some universities were preparing to start online classes. Some had just started. Some teachers had already started online classes. Some were about to start. So the views that I have shared with you mainly come from, mainly portray the picture as it was in July, but things may have changed by now because all the teachers and students have now had more experience of online classes. So what they shared about online teaching and assessment might actually have changed by now. So it would be interesting to see how they respond to the questions that we asked them at that time. So we are actually conducting a follow-up study at present. So at some point, I think we'll be able to compare the findings and see if teachers' beliefs about what they are capable of, whether they are able to teach online or not, whether they believe they can teach effectively or not, have changed by now. Thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry, we don't have a lot of time for questions, but what I can suggest is that you go to the Hangouts section on the main page of the Eventzilla site, and you can take one of the spare breakout rooms if you wanted to continue to
Okay.
take questions, kind of go into more depth. That would be
Okay.
the best place to do it. I need to get this room ready for the next presentation. I'm sorry.
Okay. But we have had questions already.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank
could
you
I
very much.
get everybody